I was halfway through my morning coffee when I saw her marching across my front lawn like she owned the place, clipboard in hand, and a scowl that could curdle milk. Barbara Sanderson, president of the Riverside Oaks Homeowners Association in Charlotte, North Carolina, had that particular look on her face that every homeowner in our neighborhood had learned to dread. The kind of look that meant someone was about to have their day absolutely ruined over something completely ridiculous. "Mr. Henderson," she called out, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "We need to discuss your tree situation immediately." I set down my coffee mug and walked to the front door, already feeling my blood pressure rising. Through the screen door, I could see her standing about 10 feet from my beautiful 200-year-old oak tree, the one that had been the main reason my wife, Sarah, and I had bought this house 3 years ago. The massive tree stood proud in the front yard, its sprawling branches providing shade across half our property and a good portion of the street. "Good morning, Barbara," I said, keeping my tone as neutral as possible. "What tree situation are you referring to?" She thrust her clipboard toward me like it was a weapon. "This oak tree of yours is in violation of Section 7.3 of the HOA bylaws. It needs to be removed within 30 days, or you'll face daily fines of $200. I actually laughed. I could not help it. The sound came out before I could stop myself. "You cannot be serious. This tree is older than anyone in this neighborhood. It's probably older than the entire city of Charlotte itself." Barbara's face turned an impressive shade of red. "I am completely serious, Mr. Henderson. The tree poses a potential hazard to the community. Its branches extend over public property, and several neighbors have complained about falling acorns and leaves." "Falling acorns," I repeated slowly, making sure I had heard her correctly. "You want me to cut down a 200-year-old oak tree because of falling acorns. And leaves," she added primly. "Mrs. Chen from 3 houses down says she has to sweep her driveway twice a week during autumn. It's creating an unreasonable maintenance burden on other residents." I stepped out onto my porch, letting the screen door close behind me. "Barbara, this tree was here long before this HOA existed, long before any of these houses were built. There's no way it violates any legitimate bylaw." She flipped through several pages on her clipboard. "Section 7.3 clearly states that any tree over 50 feet tall that extends branches beyond the property line can be deemed a hazard and subject to removal at the homeowner's expense. Your tree is approximately 80 feet tall and extends at least 15 feet past your property boundary." "Let me see that," I said, reaching for the clipboard. She pulled it back protectively. "You'll receive an official written notice within 3 business days. The 30-day countdown begins when you receive that notice. I suggest you contact a tree removal service immediately. A tree this size will likely cost between $8,000 and $12,000 to remove properly." My jaw must have hit the floor. $12,000? Are you out of your mind? "I don't make the rules, Mr. Henderson. I simply enforce them. Good day." She turned on her heel and marched back toward her house, which was 4 doors down and had, I noted bitterly, 2 large trees in the front yard that were easily over 50 feet tall themselves. I stood on my porch for a solid 5 minutes, trying to process what had just happened. Sarah came to the door behind me, our 6-month-old daughter Emma on her hip. "What did Barbara want?" she asked, already sounding tired. Barbara had been a thorn in our side since we moved in, sending us violation notices for everything from having our garbage cans visible from the street for more than 12 hours to painting our shutters the wrong shade of blue, even though they matched the approved color palette exactly. "She wants us to cut down the oak tree," I said, still staring at where Barbara had disappeared down the sidewalk. Sarah's eyes went wide. Our oak tree, the one in the front yard, that would be the one, says it's a hazard because it drops acorns and leaves. That's insane. Trees drop things. That is what trees do. It is literally their job. I turned to face her, feeling anger starting to replace my initial shock. She's citing some bylaw about trees over 50 feet extending past property lines, threatening us with $200 daily fines if we don't remove it within 30 days. Sarah shifted Emma to her other hip. Can she actually do that? I have no idea, but I'm going to find out. I pulled out my phone and started searching for real estate attorneys in Charlotte. This is absolutely insane. That tree is probably the most beautiful thing in this entire neighborhood. More than me, Sarah asked with a slight smile, trying to lighten the mood. You're a very close second, I said, kissing her cheek. But that tree has about 197 years on you, so it wins by default. The official notice arrived 2 days later via certified mail, just as Barbara had promised. It was printed on official HOA letterhead and filled with legal jargon that basically repeated everything Barbara had said on my lawn. I was to remove the tree within 30 days of receiving the notice or face daily fines. At the bottom was a citation for Section 7.3 of the Riverside Oaks HOA bylaws, along with several subsections I had never heard of. I immediately called David Morrison, a real estate attorney whose office was downtown. His receptionist said he could see me the following afternoon. That night, I could barely sleep. I kept thinking about that tree, about how it had been standing in that exact spot since before the Civil War, surviving hurricanes and ice storms and countless seasons. And now some power-hungry HOA president wanted it gone because of acorns. The next morning, I decided to do some research of my own. I started digging through the Riverside Oaks HOA bylaws, all 78 pages of them, looking for Section 7.3. What I found made my blood boil all over again. Section 7.3 did exist, but the wording was significantly different from what Barbara had described. The actual text read, "Trees deemed hazardous by a certified arborist may be subject to removal requests if they pose an immediate danger to persons or property. Homeowners will be given reasonable notice and opportunity to address hazardous conditions before removal is required." Nowhere did it mention anything about trees over 50 feet tall or extending past property lines. Barbara had either completely made that up or was referring to some amendment I could not find anywhere in the documentation. I called Sarah over to look at my laptop. Look at this. The actual bylaw says nothing about what Barbara claimed. It only applies to trees that are actually hazardous, and only if certified by an arborist. Sarah leaned over my shoulder, reading the text. So she's just making things up now. It looks that way. Or maybe there was some amendment passed that isn't in the public documents. Either way, this is not what she told me. So what do we do? I sat back in my chair thinking. Well, the bylaw says a certified arborist has to deem it hazardous. So let's get a certified arborist out here to look at it. If they say it's healthy and safe, then Barbara doesn't have a leg to stand on. I spent the next hour calling tree services and arborists in the Charlotte area. Most of them were booked out for weeks, but I finally found one who had a cancellation and could come out that afternoon. His name was Robert Chen, and he had been a certified arborist for over 20 years. Robert showed up at 2 in the afternoon driving a truck with Chen Tree Services painted on the side. He was in his 50s, wearing work clothes and carrying a leather folder full of documents and tools. "So you're having an HOA issue," he said after I explained the situation. "I get a lot of calls like this, unfortunately, More and more HOAs are trying to force people to remove perfectly healthy trees. "Have you ever seen one this old?" I asked, gesturing at the massive oak. Robert walked around the tree slowly, looking up into its branches, running his hand over the bark, examining the root structure. He pulled out some kind of probe and took several measurements. The whole inspection took about 45 minutes. Finally, he came back to where I was standing on the porch. "Mr. Henderson, this is one of the healthiest oak trees I've seen in years. No signs of disease, no rot, no structural weaknesses. The root system is solid, the branch structure is sound. This tree could easily stand for another 100 years or more." Relief flooded through me. So it's not hazardous, not even close. In fact, trees like this are increasingly rare. This is a southern live oak, probably close to 250 years old based on the trunk diameter. It's actually protected under several state and local regulations. I blinked. "Protected? What do you mean protected?" Robert pulled out a document from his folder. "North Carolina has heritage tree laws. Any tree over a certain age or size can be designated as a heritage tree, which provides legal protection against removal. Charlotte also has tree preservation ordinances. A tree this old and this healthy cannot just be cut down because someone doesn't like acorns." I felt like hugging him. "Can you put all of this in writing?" "Absolutely. I'll prepare a full arborist report with photographs, measurements, and my professional certification that this tree is healthy and poses no hazard. I'll also include information about the heritage tree status and local preservation ordinances. Should be ready in a couple of days. How much do I owe you?" "The inspection is $250. The written report is another $150, worth every penny if it saves this tree." I paid him on the spot, feeling better than I had in days. Barbara thought she could bully me into cutting down this tree, but she had another thing coming. My appointment with David Morrison the next day went even better. His office was in a modern building downtown, all glass and steel. David himself was in his early 40s, wearing an expensive suit and the kind of confident smile that came from winning a lot of cases. I explained the entire situation, showing him the HOA notice, the actual bylaw text, and telling him about Robert Chen's inspection. David leaned back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers. "This is an interesting case. The HOA is clearly overstepping its authority. The bylaw they're citing doesn't actually support what they're demanding. And if the arborist confirms the tree is healthy and protected, they have no legal grounds whatsoever. So what should I do? First, wait for the arborist report. Once you have that, send a formal response to the HOA refusing the removal demand and citing the arborist's findings. Include copies of the heritage tree information and preservation ordinances. Make it clear that any attempt to fine you or force removal will be met with legal action." "Will that be enough to stop them?" David smiled, but it was not a particularly nice smile. "Probably not immediately. HOAs like this tend to be run by people who are used to getting their way. But once they realize you have legal grounds and are willing to fight, they usually back down. If they don't, we can pursue an injunction and potentially sue for harassment." "How much would that cost?" "My retainer is $5,000, but honestly, I don't think it will go that far. Send the response letter first. Most of the time, that's enough." I thanked him and left his office feeling armed for battle. Barbara had picked the wrong person to mess with. Robert Chen's report arrived via email 2 days later. It was thorough, professional, and absolutely beautiful. 12 pages detailing every aspect of the tree's health, complete with photographs and technical measurements. His conclusion was crystal clear. The tree was healthy, structurally sound, and posed no hazard to anyone or anything. He also included a section about heritage tree status and local preservation laws, noting that removing a tree of this age and size would likely require special permits that would be nearly impossible to obtain. I printed out 3 copies. One for my records, one to send to the HOA, and one to keep with David Morrison's office. That evening, I drafted my response to the HOA. Sarah helped me refine the language, making sure it was professional but firm. The letter explained that a certified arborist had examined the tree and found it to be healthy and non-hazardous, that the tree appeared to qualify for heritage protection status, and that local preservation ordinances would prevent its removal regardless of HOA demands. I concluded by stating that I would not be removing the tree and that any fines assessed would be challenged in court. I sent it via certified mail the next morning, requiring a signature on delivery. 3 days passed without any response. Then 4. Then 5. I was starting to think maybe David had been right, that the letter would be enough to make Barbara back down. I was wrong. On day 6, I received another certified letter. This one informed me that the HOA board had reviewed my response and rejected it. They claimed their own expert had evaluated the tree and found it to be hazardous. The 30-day deadline would stand, and fines would begin accruing if the tree was not removed by the deadline. Their own expert, Sarah said when I showed her the letter. What expert? They never came to our property. Exactly, they're making it up. I was furious now. This had gone from annoying to completely outrageous. I called David Morrison immediately. His response was short and to the point. They're bluffing. They either never had an expert evaluate it, or their expert is not actually certified. Send another letter demanding the name and credentials of this supposed expert, along with a copy of their report. They won't be able to produce it. I did exactly that, sending off another certified letter that same afternoon. This one was shorter and more aggressive, demanding documentation of the HOA's alleged expert evaluation. 2 days later, Barbara showed up at my door again. This time she was not alone. She had brought 2 other people with her, Mark Stewart, the HOA vice president, and Jennifer Walsh, the treasurer. All 3 of them looked angry. "Mr. Henderson," Barbara said coldly, "this situation has gone far enough. You are deliberately obstructing the HOA's authority and creating a hostile environment in this neighborhood." I stepped out onto the porch, crossing my arms. I'm protecting my property rights and a 200-year-old tree. If that creates a hostile environment, that's not my problem. Mark stepped forward. He was a tall guy in his 50s with gray hair and a red face that suggested high blood pressure. "You're setting a dangerous precedent. If we let you ignore the bylaws, everyone will start ignoring them. That's not how an HOA works." "I'm not ignoring the bylaws," I said evenly. "I'm following them exactly as they're written. The bylaw you're citing requires a certified arborist to deem the tree hazardous. I had a certified arborist examine it, and he says it's perfectly healthy. Where's your certified arborist? Where's your report?" The 3 of them exchanged glances. Jennifer, a thin woman in her 40s with blonde hair pulled back in a tight bun, spoke up. "We don't have to share internal HOA documents with individual homeowners." "Actually, you do," I countered. "HOA bylaws require transparency. If you're using an expert evaluation to justify a removal demand, I have the right to see that evaluation. So I'll ask again. Where is it?" Barbara's face turned red. "The deadline stands, Mr. Henderson. If that tree is not removed by the 30th day, you will be fined $200 per day. And those fines will continue until the tree is removed or you sell your house and leave." "I'd like to see you try," I said. "My attorney is very interested in this case." especially since you seem to be making up bylaws and expert evaluations that don't actually exist. Mark's eyes narrowed. Are you threatening legal action against the HOA? I'm stating facts. You're demanding I destroy a protected heritage tree based on made-up rules and invisible expert reports. If you try to fine me for refusing, yes, I will absolutely take legal action. You'll lose, Barbara said flatly. The HOA has the right to maintain community standards. Not when those standards violate state and local laws. Heritage trees are protected in North Carolina. The Charlotte Tree Preservation Ordinance makes it illegal to remove a tree this old without special permits. Even if I wanted to cut it down, which I don't, I couldn't get permission from the city. This was news to them. I could see it on their faces. They clearly had not done any actual research before issuing their demands. Jennifer recovered first. We'll look into that. But the HOA bylaws supersede local ordinances when it comes to private property. No, they don't, I said. That's not how laws work, at all. HOA bylaws cannot override state and municipal regulations. Any lawyer would tell you that. We stared at each other for a long moment. Finally, Barbara said, "The deadline stands. We'll see you in 30 days, Mr. Henderson." They walked away and I went back inside, shaking with anger and adrenaline. That went well, Sarah said dryly from the living room, where she had been listening through the open window. They're not going to stop, I said. They're going to keep pushing this until someone backs down, and it's not going to be me. So what's next? I'm going to file for heritage tree status. If the tree is officially designated as a heritage tree, they won't be able to touch it even if they wanted to. I spent the rest of the afternoon researching the heritage tree designation process. It turned out to be more complicated than I expected. I needed to submit an application to the Charlotte Tree Advisory Commission, including documentation of the tree's age, size, and historical significance. The commission met once a month to review applications. The next meeting was in 2 weeks. If I could get the application submitted before then, I might have a decision before the HOA's 30-day deadline expired. I worked on the application for 3 days, gathering historical records, property documents, and Robert Chen's Arborist report. I even found old photographs of the property from the 1960s showing the tree already massive and mature. Based on the trunk diameter measurements, Robert estimated the tree was between 250 and 300 years old, which would make it one of the oldest trees in Charlotte. I submitted the application with a week to spare before the commission meeting. The clerk who received it looked impressed by the documentation. "This is quite a tree," she said, flipping through the photographs. "We don't get many applications for trees this old. Most of them were cut down decades ago for development. Can you give me any sense of how likely approval is?" I asked. She smiled. "I can't make any promises, but between you and me, the commission loves preserving historic trees. Your documentation is thorough, and the tree clearly meets all the criteria. I'd be surprised if they turned it down." That was encouraging, at least. I left the city building feeling hopeful for the first time in weeks. The HOA, meanwhile, was not done making my life difficult. 2 days after my confrontation with Barbara and her companions, I received a violation notice for having my garbage cans visible from the street. They had been out for exactly 2 hours on trash collection day. The notice included a $50 fine. The day after that, another notice arrived citing me for having a car parked in my driveway overnight. My car, that I owned, parked in my own driveway. Another $50 fine. Sarah found a third notice stuck to our door when she went to get the mail. This one claimed our grass was too long, even though I had mowed it 3 days earlier and it was no more than 2 inches high. Another $50 fine. They're retaliating, Sarah said, holding up the 3 notices. This is harassment. I took pictures of all 3 notices and forwarded them to David Morrison with a brief explanation. His response came back within an hour. Document everything. These are clearly retaliatory and will help our case if this goes to court. The next week was a nightmare. Every single day brought a new violation notice. My mailbox was too close to the street. My house numbers were the wrong font. My garden hose was visible from the sidewalk. My porch light was the wrong color temperature. On and on and on. Each notice came with a $50 fine. By the end of the week, they claimed I owed them over $400 in various violations. I refused to pay a single penny. Sarah was getting stressed out by the constant harassment. Emma could sense her mother's tension and was fussier than usual. The whole situation was affecting our entire family. Maybe we should just move, Sarah said one evening after receiving yet another notice, this one complaining that our doormat was not an approved color. No, I said firmly. We are not letting them chase us out of our home. We did nothing wrong. That tree was here long before the HOA existed, and these violation notices are obvious retaliation. I know, but is it worth all this stress? Emma is only 6 months old. I don't want her growing up in this environment. I pulled Sarah close. It won't be like this forever. Once the heritage tree designation goes through, and once the HOA realizes we're not backing down, they'll stop. Bullies always do. I hope you're right. The Tree Advisory Commission meeting was held on a Thursday evening at City Hall. I took off work early and drove downtown, bringing copies of all my documentation just in case. The commission consisted of 7 members, 3 city employees from the Parks Department, 2 local arborists, and 2 citizen representatives. They sat at a long table at the front of a meeting room while about 20 people sat in the audience, waiting for various items on the agenda. My application was 4th on the list. I sat through 3 other cases first, trying not to fidget nervously. The commission seemed reasonable and thorough, asking good questions and carefully reviewing documentation. Finally, they called my name. I walked to the front and stood at a small podium while they reviewed my application on their laptops. One of the arborists, a woman named Dr. Patricia Moore, spoke first. Mr. Henderson, I've reviewed your documentation and I have to say, this is an exceptional tree. The photographs alone are stunning. Can you tell us about the current situation? Your application mentions HOA issues. I explained the whole story, from Barbara's initial demand to the constant stream of retaliatory violation notices. I kept it factual and professional, avoiding emotional language, but I could see the commission members' faces darkening as I spoke. So the HOA is attempting to force removal of a tree that's been certified healthy by a licensed arborist, Dr. Moore said slowly. And when you refused, they began issuing daily violations for minor infractions. That's correct. I have copies of all the violation notices if you'd like to see them. That won't be necessary. We've seen this pattern before, unfortunately. She looked at her fellow commission members. I move that we grant heritage tree status immediately, with an emergency designation that takes effect today rather than after the standard waiting period. Another commissioner, one of the Parks Department employees, nodded. I second that motion. This tree clearly meets all criteria, and the circumstances warrant expedited action. They took a vote. It was unanimous. Dr. Moore smiled at me. Congratulations, Mr. Henderson. Your oak tree is now officially designated as a Charlotte Heritage Tree. That means it cannot be removed or significantly altered without special permits, which are granted only in extraordinary circumstances like imminent danger to life or property. You'll receive official documentation within 3 business days." I thanked them profusely and practically floated out of City Hall. I called Sarah from the parking lot. "They approved it," I said as soon as she answered. "Emergency designation, effective immediately. The tree is protected." Sarah let out a whoop of joy loud enough that I had to hold the phone away from my ear. "That's amazing. So Barbara can't do anything now?" "Not a thing. The tree has legal protection. Even if the HOA wanted to push forward, they'd have to fight the city, not just me." That night, we celebrated with Emma's favorite meal, even though she mostly just threw mashed sweet potato everywhere. It felt like we had won a major victory. I sent a certified letter to the HOA the next morning, explaining the heritage tree designation and including a copy of the commission's decision. I politely but firmly stated that the tree would not be removed, that all previous violation notices were clearly retaliatory and would be challenged in court if necessary, and that any further harassment would result in immediate legal action. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong again. 3 days later, I came home from work to find Sarah standing on our front porch, her face pale with shock. "Someone tried to poison the tree," she said. My heart stopped. "What?" She pointed to the base of the oak tree. "Someone had drilled multiple holes into the trunk and poured some kind of chemical into them. I could see at least a dozen holes, each about an inch deep, arranged in a ring around the tree about 3 feet off the ground." I called Robert Chen immediately. He arrived within an hour, took one look at the holes and swore under his breath. "This is herbicide injection," he said grimly. "Someone was trying to kill the tree by poisoning it from the inside. See how the holes are arranged in a ring? That's a common pattern for intentional tree killing." "Will it work? Is the tree going to die?" Robert examined the holes more closely, even scraping out a sample of the residue. "Fortunately, whoever did this didn't know what they were doing. These holes aren't deep enough and they didn't use enough herbicide. The tree will survive, but it will be stressed. I can treat the wounds to prevent infection and help it recover." "How much will that cost?" "Don't worry about cost right now. This is a crime scene. You need to call the police." I had not even thought of that. Of course it was a crime. Someone had trespassed on my property and deliberately tried to destroy a protected heritage tree. I called 911. The dispatcher sent an officer out within 30 minutes. His name was Officer James Rodriguez, and he took the situation very seriously once I explained about the heritage tree status. "Destroying a heritage tree is a serious offense," he said, taking photographs of the holes. "This could be charged as felony vandalism given the tree's protected status and value. Do you have any idea who might have done this?" "I have suspicions," I said carefully. I explained the HOA situation, the removal demands, the retaliatory violations, and Barbara's increasingly aggressive behavior. Officer Rodriguez wrote everything down. "I'll need to interview the HOA board members. Can you provide their contact information?" I gave him Barbara's address and phone number, along with Mark's and Jennifer's information. "We'll also want to get a sample of that herbicide residue analyzed," Officer Rodriguez said. "If we can identify the specific product, we might be able to trace the purchase." Robert Chen carefully collected samples of the residue while Officer Rodriguez documented everything. The whole process took over 2 hours. After the officer left, Robert treated the holes in the tree, filling them with a protective compound and injecting nutrients to help with recovery. "Keep an eye on it over the next few weeks," he said. "Watch for any yellowing leaves or branch dieback. If you see anything concerning, call me immediately." That night, I could not sleep at all. Someone had tried to murder my tree. It sounded ridiculous when I thought about it that way, but that is exactly what had happened. And I was 99% certain I knew who was behind it, even if I could not prove it yet. 2 days later, Officer Rodriguez called me. "Mr. Henderson, I interviewed all 3 HOA board members you mentioned. Barbara Sanderson, Mark Stewart, and Jennifer Walsh all claimed to know nothing about the tree damage. However, we did get the herbicide analyzed. It's a product called Tree Be Gone, a commercial-grade herbicide sold primarily to landscaping companies. Can you trace who bought it? We're working on that. It's not sold in regular stores, which actually helps us. There are only 3 suppliers in the Charlotte area. We're checking their sales records now. What happens if you find out who bought it? If we can prove who did this, they'll be charged with felony vandalism and potentially destruction of a protected landmark. That's serious jail time and heavy fines." I thanked him and hung up, feeling a grim satisfaction. Whoever had done this was going to face real consequences. 3 days later, Officer Rodriguez called again. "Mr. Henderson, we traced the herbicide purchase. It was bought from a landscaping supply company in South Charlotte 2 days before the damage occurred. The buyer was Mark Stewart." I felt a surge of vindication. "The HOA vice president. That's right. We've issued a warrant for his arrest. He'll be charged with felony vandalism of a protected heritage tree, trespassing, and attempted destruction of public landmarks." Public landmarks. I thought it was my tree. Once a tree receives heritage designation, it becomes part of the city's protected resources, even on private property. That gives us additional charges to work with. Mr. Stewart is looking at up to 3 years in prison if convicted, plus restitution and fines. Mark Stewart was arrested the following morning. I did not see it happen, but the neighborhood gossip network lit up instantly. By noon, everyone in Riverside Oaks knew that the HOA vice president had been arrested for trying to poison my tree. The fallout was immediate and spectacular. That evening, a group of about 15 neighbors showed up at my door. I recognized most of them as people I had only waved to occasionally, but never really talked to. A man named Thomas Harper, who lived 2 streets over, acted as spokesman. "Mr. Henderson, we wanted to apologize. A lot of us had no idea the HOA was harassing you like this. We've been getting violation notices too, but nothing like what you described. This whole thing with Mark trying to poison your tree, that's completely insane." A woman named Patricia nodded. "Barbara has gotten completely out of control. She's been running the HOA like her personal fiefdom for years, but this is beyond anything we imagined. We're organizing to remove her from the board. We wanted you to know that you have support," Thomas continued. "Most of us love that old oak tree. It's one of the prettiest things in the neighborhood. We never wanted it cut down." I felt emotion welling up in my throat. After weeks of feeling isolated and attacked, having neighbors show up in support meant more than they knew. "Thank you," I managed to say. "That means a lot to my wife and me. This has been incredibly stressful." "We're calling an emergency HOA meeting next week," Patricia said. "We have enough proxies to force a vote to remove Barbara, Mark, and Jennifer from the board and replace them. We'd like you to be there." "I'll definitely be there," I said. They all shook my hand before leaving, and I went back inside feeling like maybe, finally, things were turning around. Sarah was feeding Emma in the kitchen. "That sounded positive," she said. "The neighbors are organizing to remove Barbara from the board." "And Mark was arrested for poisoning the tree." Sarah's eyes widened. "Seriously, they arrested him? Felony vandalism. He's looking at up to 3 years in prison. Good. Maybe that will make Barbara think twice about continuing this crusade." I hoped she was right, but I knew Barbara well enough by now to know she would not go down quietly. Sure enough, The next morning I found a letter from the HOA in my mailbox. This one was from Barbara personally, not on official letterhead. It was handwritten in angry, slashing script. "You have destroyed this community," it read. "Mark Stewart is a good man with a family and you've ruined his life over a tree. I hope you're proud of yourself. This neighborhood will never forgive you for what you've done. You are not welcome here." I took a picture of the letter and sent it to Officer Rodriguez and David Morrison. Both of them said the same thing. "Document everything. Do not engage. Let the legal process handle it." The emergency HOA meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday evening at the community center. Sarah wanted to come with me, but we could not find a babysitter for Emma on short notice, so I went alone. The community center was packed. I counted at least 80 people, far more than usually attended HOA meetings. The tension in the room was palpable. Barbara sat at the front table with Jennifer. Mark's chair was conspicuously empty. Both women looked furious and defensive. Thomas Harper stood up and called the meeting to order. "We're here tonight because a significant number of homeowners have requested an emergency vote to remove the current HOA board and elect new leadership. Before we vote, I think we need to discuss what's been happening." Barbara stood up abruptly. "This meeting is out of order. I'm the HOA president, and I didn't authorize it." "You don't have to authorize it," Patricia Nguyen said, standing as well. "According to our bylaws, any 25 homeowners can call an emergency meeting by petition. We have signatures from 47 households." "This is a witch hunt," Barbara said, her voice rising. "Mark Stewart is innocent until proven guilty. You're all turning on him based on accusations." "He was caught buying the herbicide," Thomas said. "The police have him on video at the supply store. This isn't about accusations. It's about what actually happened. And even if Mark did act improperly," Barbara continued, "it was because he was trying to protect this community. That tree is a hazard, no matter what some bought and paid for arborist says." I stood up. "Robert Chen is not bought and paid for. He's one of the most respected arborists in Charlotte, and the Tree Advisory Commission agreed with his assessment. That's why they gave the tree heritage protection." Barbara whirled to face me. "You have been nothing but trouble since the day you moved into this neighborhood. You don't care about anyone but yourself." "I care about not destroying a 300-year-old tree because you don't like acorns," I shot back. The room erupted in arguments. People were shouting over each other, some supporting Barbara, but most calling for her removal. It took Thomas several minutes to restore order. "Let's just vote," he finally said. "All those in favor of removing Barbara Sanderson, Jennifer Walsh, and Mark Stewart from the HOA board, raise your hands." I looked around the room. At least 60 hands went up, including mine. All opposed. Maybe 15 hands rose, mostly from people who lived near Barbara. "The motion passes," Thomas said. "Barbara, Jennifer, you're removed from the board effective immediately. We'll hold elections for new board members next month." Barbara's face went through several shades of red before settling on a purple that looked dangerously close to a stroke. "You can't do this. I've been president of this HOA for 8 years. And you've abused that position," Patricia said firmly. "It's time for new leadership." Barbara gathered up her papers and stormed out of the community center, Jennifer trailing behind her. The room burst into applause after the door slammed shut. Thomas turned to the crowd. "We need interim board members until the election. I nominate Patricia Nguyen for president." There was a chorus of agreement. Patricia accepted. "I nominate Thomas Harper for vice president," someone called out. More agreement. Within 15 minutes, we had an interim board in place, and the entire tone of the meeting had shifted from angry to hopeful. Patricia adjourned the meeting but asked me to stay behind for a moment. "Listen," she said once most people had cleared out. "On behalf of the new board, I want to apologize for everything you've been through. We're going to review all those violation notices Barbara issued against you, and I can already tell you they're all going to be dismissed. You don't owe the HOA a penny." "Thank you," I said, relief washing over me. "I appreciate that. We also want to make sure this never happens again. We're going to rewrite some of the bylaws to prevent this kind of abuse. Would you be willing to serve on the revision committee?" I thought about it for a moment. My first instinct was to say no, to stay as far away from HOA politics as possible. But then I thought about other homeowners who might face similar situations in the future. "Yes," I said, "I'll help." Over the next few weeks, life started returning to normal. Mark Stewart took a plea deal, admitting to the vandalism charges in exchange for probation, a $10,000 fine, and 200 hours of community service. He also had to resign from the HOA and was prohibited from serving on any homeowners association in North Carolina for 10 years. Barbara never apologized. She stayed in her house and stopped attending neighborhood events. I heard through the grapevine that she was trying to sell and move to a different part of Charlotte. The tree recovered fully. Robert Chen monitored it closely for a month, but the damage had been superficial. By the time autumn arrived, it was dropping acorns and beautiful red-gold leaves just like it had for the past 3 centuries. The new HOA board was a breath of fresh air. Patricia ran meetings efficiently and fairly. The committee I joined worked on revising the bylaws to include better protections for homeowners, clearer standards for violations, and a formal appeals process. We also added a specific clause protecting mature trees and requiring genuine expert evaluations before any removal demands could be made. Sarah and I even started hosting neighborhood gatherings in our front yard, under the shade of the old oak. It became a popular spot for summer evenings, with kids playing and adults chatting. The tree that Barbara had wanted destroyed became a centerpiece of community life. One evening in October, about 6 months after the whole ordeal began, I was sitting on my porch watching Emma toddle around the yard. She was 14 months old now, walking confidently and getting into everything. The oak tree's leaves were at peak color, a spectacular display of reds and golds and oranges. Sarah came out and sat beside me, handing me a beer. "You thinking about everything that happened?" "Yeah," I said. "It's strange how it all worked out. If Barbara hadn't pushed so hard, I never would have learned about heritage tree status or preservation laws. The tree is actually safer now than it was before. And the neighborhood is better off without Barbara and her cronies running things." "That too." I took a sip of my beer. "I still can't believe Mark tried to poison it, though. That was insane. People do crazy things when they think they're in the right, or when someone tells them they're in the right." Sarah leaned her head on my shoulder. "I'm glad you didn't back down." "Me too." Emma ran over to the oak tree and wrapped her tiny arms around the trunk, or at least as much of it as she could reach. She laughed and pressed her face against the bark. "She loves that tree," Sarah said softly. "She'll grow up climbing it," I said. "Just like kids probably did 100 years ago." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching our daughter play under the ancient oak. Somewhere down the street, I could hear kids riding bikes and neighbors calling greetings to each other. The neighborhood felt alive in a way it hadn't before. My phone buzzed. It was an email from the city with the subject line "Heritage Tree Recognition." I opened it and started reading. "What is it?" Sarah asked. "The city wants to put up a historic marker next to the tree. Says they're launching a new program to identify and celebrate heritage trees throughout Charlotte, and ours is going to be one of the first to get a marker." "That's wonderful. What will the marker say?" I scrolled down to the proposed text. The Riverside Oak. Southern live oak, estimated 250–300 years old. This tree has stood witness to Charlotte's history from colonial times through the Revolutionary War, Civil War, and into the modern era. Protected as a Charlotte Heritage Tree in 2025. Sarah smiled. I love it. Barbara would be furious. All the more reason to say yes. I replied to the email accepting the marker, then set down my phone and went to join Emma by the tree. She grabbed my hand and pulled me around to the other side, where a low branch created a natural seat about 2 feet off the ground. Up, she demanded. I lifted her onto the branch, holding her steady. She squealed with delight, patting the bark like it was a beloved pet. Looking up into those spreading branches, I thought about all the people who must have done exactly this over the centuries. Children climbing, parents watching, seasons changing. The tree had survived storms and droughts, wars and development, and now it had survived Barbara Sanderson's HOA crusade. David Morrison called the next day with news. The HOA has officially withdrawn all violation notices and fine demands against you. Patricia sent over a letter this morning making it official. You're completely clear. That's great news, I said. There's more. Barbara Sanderson put her house on the market yesterday. She's moving to a condo downtown. Can't say I'm sorry to hear it. I wouldn't be either. Listen, I wanted to tell you that your case has gotten some attention. The local news wants to do a story about the tree and the HOA situation. They think it's a good human interest piece. Interested? I thought about it. Part of me wanted to just let the whole thing fade away. But another part thought about other homeowners dealing with similar issues, people who might not know about heritage tree laws or their rights against HOA overreach. Yeah, I said. Let's do it. The news story aired 2 weeks later on the local NBC affiliate. It was a 5-minute segment during the evening news, complete with footage of the tree, interviews with me and Robert Chen, and even a brief statement from Patricia Nguyen about the HOA changes. The reporter, a young woman named Michelle Torres, did an excellent job laying out the timeline and highlighting the legal protections available for historic trees. The response was overwhelming. My email inbox filled up with messages from people around Charlotte, and even other parts of North Carolina who were dealing with similar issues. Some had HOAs demanding removal of old trees. Others were fighting development plans that threatened historic vegetation. I tried to respond to everyone, sharing Robert Chen's contact information and the details of the heritage tree application process. One email stood out. It was from a lawyer named Catherine Williams who specialized in environmental law. She wanted to use my case as the basis for a legal guide about protecting heritage trees in North Carolina. I agreed immediately. The guide was published online 3 months later, free for anyone to download. It included step-by-step instructions for applying for heritage tree status, information about tree preservation laws in various North Carolina cities, and a section specifically about dealing with HOA overreach. At the end, there was a case study. The Riverside Oak, how one homeowner protected a 3-century-old tree. Sarah printed out a copy and put it in a frame in our living room. For Emma, she said, so when she's older she'll know the story of her tree. Her tree, I repeated, liking the sound of it. Spring arrived, and the oak tree burst into new growth, its leaves a brilliant fresh green. The holes Mark had drilled were completely healed over, leaving only small scars that would eventually disappear as the tree continued to grow. The historic marker was installed in April during a small ceremony. The mayor came, along with several city council members and the entire Tree Advisory Commission. About 50 neighbors showed up, turning it into an impromptu block party. Dr. Patricia Moore from the commission gave a short speech about the importance of preserving historic trees in an era of rapid development. Trees like this are living links to our past, she said. They stood here before any of us were born, and with proper care, they'll be here long after we're gone. It's our responsibility to protect them. The mayor unveiled the marker, a handsome bronze plaque mounted on a stone base. Emma, now almost 2 years old, insisted on touching it, running her fingers over the raised letters. After the ceremony, Thomas Harper pulled me aside. I heard Barbara drove by earlier and saw everyone setting up. Apparently she turned around and left immediately. She still lives here. I thought she had moved. Her house is still on the market. No buyers yet. I hear she's bitter about the whole thing. I felt a twinge of something that might have been sympathy, but it did not last long. Barbara had brought all of this on herself through her aggressive overreach. If she had just followed the actual bylaws instead of making up her own rules, none of this would have happened. That summer was one of the best I could remember. The neighborhood had truly come together in the aftermath of the HOA situation. The new board organized monthly community events, always careful to be inclusive and reasonable. Violation notices were rare and only issued for legitimate safety concerns. My involvement with the Bylaw Revision Committee wrapped up in June. We had created a new set of rules that balanced community standards with homeowner rights. Patricia made sure every household received a copy, along with a letter apologizing for the previous board's behavior. One evening in late July, I was watering the plants in our front yard when I noticed someone standing on the sidewalk, looking up at the oak tree. It was Barbara. I almost went inside, but something made me stay. We hadn't spoken since she had been removed from the board over a year ago. She saw me watching her and seemed to debate whether to leave. Finally, she walked up the driveway. "Mr. Henderson," she said formally. "Barbara." An uncomfortable silence stretched between us. She looked older than I remembered, more tired. "I wanted to say," she began, then stopped, started again. "I wanted you to know that Mark's family is doing okay. His wife found a good job and he's finishing his community service." "That's good to hear," I said, genuinely meaning it. I also wanted to say that I was wrong, about the tree, about a lot of things. The words seemed to physically pain her. I got so caught up in the idea of maintaining standards and property values that I forgot these are people's homes. "Your home." I did not know what to say. An apology from Barbara was literally the last thing I had expected. "I'm moving next month," she continued. "House finally sold. I'm going to a condo where someone else deals with maintenance and rules." A bitter smile crossed her face. "Turns out I'm tired of being in charge." "I'm sorry it ended the way it did," I said, and I meant that too. I never wanted anyone to get arrested or lose their position. I just wanted to keep my tree. I know. I just couldn't see it at the time. She looked up at the oak tree, its branches spread wide against the summer sky. "It is a beautiful tree. I can see why you fought for it." "You want to know something?" I said. "When we were house hunting, Sarah and I looked at maybe 30 different places. The moment I saw this tree, I knew this was the one. It sounds stupid, but it felt like the tree was what made it home." Barbara nodded slowly. "It doesn't sound stupid. I understand that now." She turned to leave, then paused. "Take care of it, the tree, and the neighborhood." "You're better at it than I was." I watched her walk back down the driveway and disappear down the sidewalk. It was not exactly closure, but it was something. Sarah came out a few minutes later. "Was that Barbara?" "Yeah, she apologized. Seriously. Said she was wrong about everything." Sarah looked stunned. "I never thought I'd see the day. People can surprise you, I guess." "I guess they can." That fall, Emma started preschool. We took her first day of school picture under the oak tree, her tiny hand pressed against the massive trunk. We would take the same picture every year, watching her grow as the tree continued its patient, steady growth. The neighborhood settled into a comfortable rhythm. The new HOA board was efficient and fair. Patricia served as president for 2 years before stepping down, and Thomas took over. I served on the board for 1 term, just long enough to make sure the new bylaws were properly implemented. Robert Chen became a good friend. He stopped by every few months to check on the oak, always refusing payment. "This tree is special," he said during one visit. "I'm just glad I could help protect it." Life moved on, as life does. Emma grew from a toddler into a curious 5-year-old who loved climbing the lower branches of the oak tree. We hosted birthday parties under its shade, autumn gatherings to watch the leaves change, and summer barbecues where neighbors gathered to escape the heat. Mark Stewart completed his community service and probation without incident. I saw him once at a grocery store. We made eye contact, and he gave me a small, apologetic nod. I nodded back. Some things didn't need to be rehashed. Barbara moved away, and I never saw her again. I heard through the neighborhood gossip network that she was happier in her condo, freed from the stress of HOA management. I hoped that was true. The oak tree stood through all of it, unchanging and eternal, its roots deep in Carolina soil, its branches reaching toward the sky. It had survived 300 years of history, and with the heritage protection and community support, it would hopefully survive 300 more. One evening in October, 5 years after the whole situation began, I sat on my porch watching Emma and her younger brother Lucas, now 3 years old, play in the fallen leaves beneath the oak. Sarah sat beside me, her hand in mine. "You know what I was thinking about," she said. "What's that?" "If Barbara had just left us alone, none of this would have happened. The tree wouldn't be protected, the neighborhood wouldn't have reformed the HOA, none of it." "Sometimes the worst situations lead to the best outcomes," I said. "Profound," Sarah teased. "I have my moments." Emma called out from the base of the tree. "Daddy, look how high I climbed." I looked over. She was maybe 4 feet off the ground on the lowest branch. "Very impressive," I called back. "Can you get down okay?" "Of course I can." She jumped down with the fearless confidence of a 5-year-old and immediately started climbing again. Lucas tried to follow her but couldn't quite reach the branch. "Help," he demanded. I got up and walked over, lifting him onto the branch next to his sister. They sat there together, king and queen of their wooden castle, laughing at some joke only they understood. Looking at them framed by the oak's spreading branches, I thought about all the children who must have climbed this tree over the centuries. Children who were now grandparents or great-grandparents, or long since passed from this world. And yet the tree remained, patient and enduring, providing shade and shelter and joy to generation after generation. That was what Barbara had never understood. This wasn't about property values or HOA rules or neighborhood standards. It was about continuity, about being part of something larger than ourselves, about protecting beauty and history for future generations. My phone buzzed. It was an email from Catherine Williams, the environmental lawyer. She was writing to tell me that her Heritage Tree Protection Guide had been downloaded over 10,000 times, and she was getting reports of successful heritage tree applications from across North Carolina. My case had started something larger than I had ever imagined. I looked up at the oak tree, at my children playing in its branches, at my wife smiling in the golden evening light, at neighbors walking by and waving hello. This was what home looked like. This was what community looked like. And this magnificent tree was at the center of it all, just as it had been for 3 centuries. Barbara had demanded I cut it down. An arborist had certified it was perfectly healthy and protected. And now it was safe. Not just legally protected, but loved by an entire neighborhood. A living monument to persistence and community, and the power of standing up for what matters. The sun set behind the oak tree, its rays filtering through the leaves and casting golden shadows across our yard. Emma and Lucas climbed down and ran off to chase fireflies in the gathering dusk. Sarah stood and stretched, calling the kids in for dinner. I stayed on the porch a moment longer, looking at the tree one last time before going inside. Its branches swayed gently in the evening breeze, leaves rustling with a sound like whispered conversations from centuries past. "Thank you," I said quietly, not sure if I was talking to the tree or the universe, or just myself. The tree stood silent and strong, as it had for 300 years, as it would for 300 more. And that was exactly as it should be.